Thanks everybody for coming out and attending this session. You're in Innovation, Next Generation, Next Geography. My name's Nate Lewis. I'm Farm Policy Director for the Organic Trade Association. I'm going to let these pillars of the organic industry introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So let's go.
Morning. So my name is Søren Bjørn. I'm the head of Driscoll's in the Americas.
Good morning. I'm Greg Holzman. Big turnout. Pacific Organic Produce. Oh, sorry. Greg Holzman. Pacific Organic Produce and Purity Organic Fruits and Juices and Drinks.
Good morning. Jarrett Stoffel, Vice President of Operations, Taylor Farms Retail.
Great. So really what we're here to talk about is the future of organic produce, where it's going to come from, who's going to grow it, and how it's going to be grown. So again, here's here. So we're going to try to do this TED Talk style. We've sort of peppered these guys with some questions to think about as we adapt to water crises, to new pests and diseases moving in. The continued demand for organic produce is going to require producers to take innovative looks at how they're producing it and who's producing that. So first, to set the stage, I'd like to get everyone's thoughts on what are the biggest supply challenges that we're facing right now. We can go down the line.
Okay, well, I can go first. So I think on the berry side, there's no doubt about that. It's getting the ground. So the amount of organic land that's available is really the #1 challenge.
I would agree. Ingredients for not only just our juices, but everybody's products are really getting scarce in my mind. We're doing everything we can to be planting more organic everywhere we go. I travel a lot. I'm planting everywhere I go. Sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I just said that I'm traveling a lot and planting everywhere I go, everywhere I can.
Yeah, specifically from the organic vegetable side, I'd have to agree with Søren. The biggest challenge at this point is really from a demand perspective, I think, on the available ground base. And the vegetable side, going back 10 or 15 years ago, especially in the Salinas Valley, it was much easier to find some low-hanging fruit on either fallowed ground or ground on the outskirts of the Salinas Valley that you could convert fairly easily or jump into and begin farming right away after you're getting your certifications finished. But that low-hanging fruit, I think, is really gone away. And furthermore, on the vegetable side, we're starting to kind of go through, in my mind, a little bit more of a revolution on the next phase of organic commodities. And so, the baby greens were certainly the first foray in a large-scale way in this area on organic farming. And those are pretty flexible items that you can get into some sandier dirt and some outlying areas. And now, as the organic market's begun to mature a little bit, some hardier soil, you get into some different commodities that require some different conditions, and that's a little harder to come by. So conversion and the cost of conversion with ground is probably the biggest demand challenge at this point.
So we've just you all just sort of echoed the main issue being finding ground. What's stopping owners from moving that land into organic? What's preventing that? Well, the market's here. I mean, look at how many people are here.
I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, conversion is a scary process to a lot of conventional growers. Biggest concern is production going down. Next biggest concern is the price is going to go up enough to compensate. Mm-hmm. So that's probably the biggest hurdle I've been facing for the last 20 years.
And I mean, making the argument with all the data still doesn't seem to
carry any water. We win with some, and we don't with others.
There's also the dynamic that certainly in California is the reality that the people that own the land are not the people that farm the land a lot of times. So who takes the risk of going through the conversion, right? Really the landowner gets the ultimate benefit, but that landowner a lot of times sits, in a cabin up in Tahoe, not really that involved in the operation. And so the farmer that actually is going to farm the organic ground has to take the risk a lot of times, but it's on a leased piece of ground. So that's a very tricky situation because that farmer then takes on a lot of risk by going through the conversion.
Mm-hmm. Have you guys thought of or worked within your organizations on sort of incentivizing that transition process? Or
we do. as heavily as we can. We make it as easy as possible. We lend money at low interest rates or no interest at all. Try to get people understanding that we have need out there, and they can be filling that need if they're aggressive and smart and want to make them, and they take the risk. We help them as best as we can.
Provide a market for those crops in transition.
That's our business.
Yeah.
Well, the transition crop market is very difficult for us because we're Pacific Organic Produce. So we just sell organic produce. We've tried transitional markets over the past twice, I guess. It was a real bleeding edge move. It was real tough. I hear it's coming back again. I read recently somebody was talking about transitional again. Maybe timing's everything. Maybe there's some timing for transitional.
Yeah, in berries, you can get a little bit of benefit by using the transitional berries to go to export. So markets that have much tighter requirements on MRLs, Japan, Taiwan, even parts of Europe. So you can use that transitional fruit. It's difficult to get it to match up. The amount of transitional fruit with the demand doesn't always match, but you can capture part of the premium in that market.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I'll take that and use that as a segue to highlight something the Trade Association has been working on for the last year, which is a federally administered transitional program through the Quality Systems Assessment Program. A lot of certifiers currently offer transitional certification. A lot of those are from sort of relics from before the time we had the National Organic Program, and they were used to really help producers get into the organic certification scheme. There's been a lot of interest in developing a transitional market, particularly on the grain side, but we've sort of looked at the pros and cons, the risks and the benefits, and we've put together a program that's now under review at USDA for establishing a voluntary program that would allow for transitional labeling of products that were actually on their way to organic. So we'll have a question and answer session towards the end of this, but I did want to make
I resent only a little the relic comment. No, we tried California Clean in the mid-90s, and it fell hard, and bleeding edge kind of stuff. But I endorse any move in that direction, and we'd love to try to support it. Like I said earlier, timing is everything. Maybe the timing is better now. It was really difficult for us.
It's hard to say, and
really difficult
essentially what we want to make sure though is that we're not creating an organic light market that's pulling consumers out of the organic market.
The biggest concern was you're transitional and then you spray and then you
Right.
feel like you're deceiving. The consumer can feel deceived.
Right.
And that
So
was it.
yeah, we've coined that as arrested transition and or perpetual transition, and that's something that we've put mechanisms into place, at least in our proposal, to avoid that reality. So.
If I can help you, let me know how.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's jump into the meat of the matter. Labor, water availability, impact supply. We know that. What are your operations doing to solve for these challenges?
So, for us, there's really three things that we're focused on, and it's around our genetics. So, all Driscoll's berries pretty much come from proprietary genetics. So we're really working on improving the genetics to be a lot more disease resistant, both for organic, but really also to just the new environments we're going into. So I think genetics is a big component for us. Then technology is a big component for us. We are increasingly moving out of the soil, into potted production, including in organics, which helps tremendously with water. We've used at least 40% less water when we go in potted production. It also helps quite a bit with the labor because we can space out the plants more. And then geography. We're just leveraging a lot more new geographies to get the kind of production we want, both in conventional and organic. And for us, because berries are so fragile, we have to be within trucking distance. That mostly means going up on little mountain tops in Mexico to areas that are cool and the climate is more similar to the coast of California, but at a very different latitude. And so we leverage those three things, genetics, technology, and geography, to sort of get what we need, both in conventional and organic.
I'd say from the vegetable perspective, technology's got everything to do with both of those questions. On our side, we've spent a lot of R&D and money over the last 7 years really trying to automate our harvestable products with machinery. We started with romaine about 7 years ago and have made huge strides in being able to automatically harvest all of our romaine product. Our next kind of forays are into automated cabbage harvesting, automated celery harvesting. Those are all long-term projects, and you learn a little bit each year. They're also expensive projects. You don't know what you don't know until you start rolling them out into different fields, into different conditions, into different areas. And so those are efforts I think that we'll get better and better at each year. We're also trying to focus on technology on the grower side to really make sure in terms of irrigation use, we're being as efficient as we can be, and there's room for improvement there on a commodity by commodity basis. So using technology to actually know when you need to irrigate and how you need to irrigate by commodity, there's some room for improvement there, and technology can help us get there. So those are a couple of the things that we're looking at. From a manufacturing perspective, we're trying to recycle as much of that water that we use to wash and clean our vegetables as we can. And that might be on a municipal basis in some areas. In the Salinas Valley, we've actually got a pretty good footprint to be able to reuse and clean recycled processed water to come back into the system within the farming community. And it's just a matter of the main players in this group being able to get together and put the infrastructure in place to be able to do that. In other areas across the country where the municipal systems aren't quite as established, we're looking at recyclability on a plant-by-plant basis with smaller RO and filtration systems to help reuse everything that we're washing the vegetables with.
Yeah, I don't, because I'm mostly I spend a lot of my time in Central and South America, and I'm on the fence about labor because I want more people to get more jobs. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we resist a lot of extra equipment because there is fairly strong labor forces from time to time, depending upon where we are. So it's just a little bit different challenges. But we started our business in Washington State, and so I'm conscious of all of these things, but these guys are much more involved.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, so here's the seal that has sort of brought us all here today and grown this industry to what it is now, $45 billion total. So how do the requirements inherent to the USDA seal assure integrity for products sourced both domestically and internationally? And maybe you can talk a little bit about your own sort of internal quality systems that ensure consumers are getting an organic product when they pick it off the shelves.
Yeah, we went to Mexico 25 years ago, a little bit more than 25 years ago. When we went, we knew that there was going to be some pressure on us and there's going to be some extra scrutiny. So we really went with the attitude that our standards in Mexico had to be higher than California because we knew that there was going to be extra scrutiny. And so that really started in food safety. That was really the big concern. And then as we got into organics, which was later, we really applied the same thing in organics. And so we really go in with a lot more resources. I think the good news is that a lot of times people don't know that much, so you have to educate them and to get into the program. And so we just took that extremely seriously because we knew the risk to our company and to our brand was so great. And so when we have people come and look at what we do, whether it's in food safety or organic integrity, I think they're generally surprised at how high a standard our Mexican operations are at. And so that was just our attitude from the beginning. We knew that scrutiny was going to be there, and we weren't going to take any chances.
I would echo a lot of that, and we rely a lot on European certifiers and the European community that buys a lot of the product that we also source from Central and South America and Mexico. So we benefit from that. I think America benefits from that because the standards in Europe are much higher on all chemical processes. So everything's tested when it comes in. And so we do benefit from that, and we have been able to, we have field people all over Central and South America, and we do from time to time go to a farm and say, no, you're not organic. And well, I have a cert. We're not going to bring your product in. I don't think your product's going to get to Europe, but good luck. And if I see it in the U.S., I'll tell everybody I know.
Wow. To echo Greg's point, I think the consumers are the greatest regulator that you can have. I mean, the interconnectedness of everybody at any hour of the day, the damage you do to yourself and your company to deviate from a set of standards or regulations. I think you can look at examples, Volkswagen, something out of the room, but you look at that, what a great company that was, and to look at what they've gone through after trying to cheat on their emissions tests a little bit. in the U.S. and elsewhere. I mean, you took kind of an icon like the Beetle and watched North American sales come down 40% for a year, and that'll be a long, long time before that company recovers. So anybody managing a company or running a company that's going to think about deviating from set standards, I think they'll be short-lived.
Good example.
So demand continues to grow. Where is your company looking to innovate and expand in order to ensure long-term supplies? You know, we've touched on some of these things, but you know, what do you think is the future for your segments of the industry?
For us, I think at the core will be our genetics. So in berries, really the biggest challenge moving from conventional to organic is the fact you can't fumigate the ground. Okay, in strawberries, that automatically says 30% reduction in yield right there, right off the bat. And but we knew the day was going to come that we won't have fumigants because, Greg said, in Europe, you know, we already deal with this, and we have quite a large European operation. So 15 years ago, we decided to move all our breeding to plots that were non-fumigated. So even for the conventional breeding, we don't breed in fumigated ground. Really beginning to realize that day was coming. And so for us, we're benefiting tremendously for that in organics. So we're beginning to overcome some of these soil diseases that we overcome with fumigation through genetics. So for us, genetics will always be at the core of what we do. But we also think that the technology side is really important. And so the ability to produce organic in substrate, which we can do in North America, but we can't do in Europe, we think is quite critical. And you know, that's not a topic that's without some degree of controversy. But when you look at the overall sustainability of that production system, you know, the reduction in water in particular is very, very significant. The reduction in other inputs is quite significant. We really think that those technologies are critical to being able to have the kind of growth we need to have in organics. And because the market is growing much faster than conventional, for us it's growing at 4 times, you know, the speed of conventional growth. And you know, the berry category is still growing significantly. So we need those tools. Those would be the 2 most critical things for us, is the genetics and the technology.
Just reacting to your slide, new technologies. I personally invested in a biopesticide company in Brazil, and we're now expanding into Peru and Chile, trying to just work more organically and work with products that work, that are organic products. And geography is my whole business and commodities. So I'm looking for windows, as anybody in my business is. We're looking to fill markets with organic product. So what are we missing? Not that hard to identify, but then hard to go find some grower to grow it with you. So I travel a lot for that purpose, and I do my best to fill those windows, but it's a never-ending challenge with all the growth we're seeing, which is really cool and exciting.
So on the biopesticide side of things, are there new tools that you're excited about? Is this about making existing ones more effective?
We're working with beneficial fungus and bacteria that, it's not new, but I think there are some innovations that are happening. And I'm trying to be as close to the forefront of that. And I'll sell some of it to these guys.
We'll be glad to buy it.
I'll take it. From a vegetable perspective, I think we're going to continue to look at diversity of ground and diversity of area and microclimate. So areas where we've got established, even if it's conventional growing, but established food-safe growing areas that have water, that have a diverse ground base, we'll continue to pursue the conversion process and try to develop more organic ground that way. I think that's kind of be the first step. The other things we're trying to do is just really trying to control loss mitigation, and that's going to have to do with a little bit more use of technology, where we're going to have to use different camera imaging and technology to see potential funguses and problems days before the human eye would be able to see it, so that we can react, adjust forecasts accordingly, communicate that to our customers, and be able to manage through supply situations.
And organic makes you do that.
Exactly right.
Yeah, no question.
Exactly right.
No question.
And so the technology, in terms of being able to see problems before we can today, will be a direction we head. And the other part of it is again, to be able to mitigate losses. So especially with certain crops, the cost component of yield and total acre losses, and I'll point out to an organic spinach, and I know many of you have probably dealt with it in one way or another. That's a prime example of a commodity today that is probably at this rate not a sustainable crop compared to what your conventional alternatives are. And so breakthroughs in biochemicals that we can use to control those funguses and soil-borne diseases are going to really need to come about for certain commodities to be able to continue the growth.
Wish it were easier to register them in the States.
I agree.
So one of the things I don't think we have quite touched on with the questions here, which is when it was part of the title of the session, is the next generation. And America's farmers are aging, the population's moving on. How are we going to bring the next generation into get them on the land and convince them that organic's the right choice?
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't really touched on, the way we go about our business is a little bit different than, most produce companies. So just because we don't grow anything, we have actually 800 independent growers that pretty much all of them only grow for us, and they have their own business. And so one of the things we are very concerned about is actually what does that next generation look like? There's no doubt about that our grow base is aging. So we have put together a program, we call it the Community Grower, which is really intended to go out and recruit young people and get them in the business. And so we are helping them getting started and giving them a little small ownership in that first farm with the ability for them to end up owning the whole farm over time. And so this is particularly something we're doing in Mexico. It's really trying to get people into the business. As more and more technology is coming into this business, the requirement for capital is going up significantly. And that's a huge risk to the future of farming, in not only this country, but in other countries as well. And so we are trying to overcome that by getting people sort of off the ground. And we really see that that's a program we're going to have to keep in place, for a very, very long time. So there is that future pipeline. It's not for lack of interest. There's lots of young people that want to do this. It's just getting started is so hard. And the barrier is going to go up between the capital and the regulation. I mean, the amount of regulation we have is, quite tremendous. And so that's very, very difficult for somebody that starts out. And we can help. We have really, really talented people in our organization. A couple of them are sitting here in the second row that know all the regulations, okay, and they can help our growers getting started with that. So we see that as our job is creating that next generation ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with Soren. I think there's a lot of interest in the younger generation to be more organic and produce more organic, but the obstacles are financial. And so we're doing everything we can too. I mean, I sold my produce company to UNFI, and I grab their money every time I can and put it into the land as often as I can.
Yeah, my sense on the younger generations coming through is that there's interest, to your point, into growing organically and doing those things, but they don't want to do it like their parents did it. They want to do it differently than Dad did it. They want to do it differently than their mother or their uncle did it. The hours, the time that it took and that they put in to do what they did, it doesn't seem to resonate as well from the next upcoming generation. So I think there's an ability from the technology perspective to be able to help bridge that gap a little bit. So when I see farmers or we interact with people that we're trying to work in with our company, getting out there and moving pipe or doing different things, doesn't sound as appealing as to when we strap a hyperspectral camera on a drone and fly it over a field. Then all of a sudden everybody lights up a little bit and they're more willing to come in and participate. So I think there's an ability there for technology to kind of be a gap between the generational hand down of farms.
So basically, if we want to get the next generation, it's drones, right? That's
Got to keep it interesting.
Hey,
Farmers love toys.
I'm just saying toys help. Is all.
Like Pokemon Go.
Pokemon Go, huh? So I think another major challenge we're facing is climate change, and what we can argue about what's causing it, but it is happening. And how are you seeing that affect where you're growing? I'm from Washington State, and I have a lot of experience with certification up there, and the landscape of crops in Washington State is starting to resemble more what's being grown in California. And I think there's a water issue there, but I think there's a climate issue. And so not necessarily, I don't want folks to tell where you're headed next, but what's your thought process around looking at just that tension between climate no longer being conducive or optimal for one particular crop where you're already invested in, and the decision to move to a new location and take the risk there?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, so, in any one of our business units, whether it's in Europe or in the Asia Pacific region, the Americas, we are slowly shifting into different geographies, and it's the resources. I mean, I would still say for us the number one resource limitation is labor. Our crop is very labor intensive, and so obviously in this country it's very, very difficult to get the labor for obvious reasons, and so we are having to move to where the labor is, and but we are also seeing that there are, particularly on the coast of California, where the microclimates are so important, that these microclimates are really changing. It's become a lot less foggy. I mean, it's really foggy this morning, but but it's become a lot less foggy, and you go like, well, that's not that big a deal. For berries, that's a huge deal. Those are inland ranges in Salinas that they can't be berry ranges anymore, and maybe they used to be. Same thing on the east side of Santa Maria. It's very, very tough. Last week we threw 5 million pounds of strawberries on the east side of Santa Maria away because it's too hot. So that, we get sort of boxed into places where it works, okay, and then ultimately we have to move, and it's happening. It's just not that easy, and when you have 800 independent growers with their own business, they just operate in a little geography. They're not that likely to move, right? An Oxnard grower is not very likely to go to Tapalpa in Mexico, but that may be where we need to be. So.
And so, are you seeing it's that the climate change is still it's inconsistent? It's the fluctuations, it's the unpredictability that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think that in the short term, that's the biggest issue, is the volatility is created in our business, and the berry category is the largest category in produce in terms of value. So our customers expect that to be a lot more stable than it is, and so we get back to the same issues that I already talked about: genetics, technology, and geography, and to try to create more stability in what we're doing, and we have to do it. And so a lot of that would be, we won't be as exposed to the environment in the future. We are moving much more indoors. I mean, by that I don't mean factory farming just yet, but it is moving that direction. And you see that in Europe. In Europe, a lot more of our production is in very protected environment. And that's the direction it's going to go.
We'll talk about capital improvements, though, or expensive, because that's where it really hits.
Yeah. I mean, you're going from an acre of strawberries in Watsonville, you can probably plant for $25,000, and now you're going for an acre. Now you're going to $300,000-$400,000 an acre to establish that acre. So it's a whole different ball game. And but we feel like we're sort of on top of it, and we're having the right conversations, and we're helping our growers get there, and it's a healthy category, so people are willing to invest in it. It's just a very different conversation with a grower that used to go down to the bank and get a 6 months cash flow deal with a bank, and now they need a 15-year mortgage, right? It's a totally different proposition.
And that probably, in conjunction with most land being rented, makes that proposition even more
Yeah,
difficult.
now you have to own the land.
Nice.
You can't build a house on a rented piece of ground, ideally.
I deal mostly in tree fruit. That's what our business is about. So we don't deal with that many leased farms. Mostly it's owned land. But there's no question, for 20 plus years we've been fighting rains that we don't want to see in the wrong times, right? So, and are they becoming less predictable? Yeah, they're becoming less predictable. Does it drive me to places that look really dry, that still have water? Yes, absolutely. So Washington State, where you come from, central eastern Washington, where it's still pretty dry, and the apple production keeps kind of going up, right? Because they're planting in the places they know are a little bit safer. They still have their hailstorms, and they still have their thises and that's.
And the Columbia River keeps flowing by.
And the Columbia River keeps flowing by. So we do that in Argentina with the Rio Negro, same principle, right? But California's always been a little bit more difficult. Chile's a little more difficult because the weather's a little less predictable, and those unseasonable rains can really destroy a crop. And we're investing money, but most importantly, we're trying to bring to the market good quality product, selfishly speaking. So, we can't endure that. Now, we see the ugly fruit movement happening, and we like that. We hope more of that happens. Been trying to work at that for all our careers. But no question that I look particularly for, I spent a lot of time in Peru because Peru is relatively dry and somewhat predictable, it appears. And there seems to be plenty of water in the aquifers and the water from it coming from the Andes on a constant basis. But when the miners get in there and start tearing that apart, or the forestry guys start tearing it apart, and that's a very tender water system. So we get involved in movements and fighting everywhere we can to try to hold back some of that, try to preserve that water supply.
I think probably one of the bigger factors in my experience in exploring new areas in terms of moving our operation is this perception that you're going to go in as a huge ag company with equipment, automation, people, material, run into an area that it typically might be a smaller growing or harvesting window than a California or an Arizona would be, use up the resources, make a bunch of noise, cause problems, and then pull out until the next season. And so in my mind, getting into these different areas, firmly committing as a company, I kind of recall when 14 or 15 years ago when we first started growing down in central Mexico, and it was critical for our group to make sure that they knew that we weren't going anywhere and that we had a plan of how we were going to approach ranches, farmers, fields. We were going to control waste and how we were going to approach our business. And if when we went through the bumpy time that we weren't going to be a company that was a ghost and out the door the next year with the remaining community there to deal with the mess. So the different communities that big agriculture is coming to, I think it's an important part that those companies are part of the fabric of that area and know that they're going to be there for the long term.
Interesting. Commodities, specific commodities you're excited about? Is Driscoll's going to get into the acai berry business or Taylor Farms? Like you're going to bring back kohlrabi?
That's my job.
No, we are very focused on what we do. We do the 4 berries. We've done that for a long time, and it turns out that people all over the world like berries, and so we've decided what we're going to do is take the sort of Driscoll's model that started right here in Watsonville, California, and we are basically trying to take it everywhere. And so we are now in China. We're in Australia, New Zealand. We're all over Europe, and so we produce in 22 countries, selling in 75, and what we're focused on is doing the 4 berries and do it really well, conventional and organic. And I think are more likely to bring organics to the other geographies that there are not a lot of organic berries in Europe. That I think is going to come. Same thing in Australia, and so that's really our focus.
Okay.
Yeah, things are really changing, but we started and ran our business for all of these years, 20 plus years, on the idea that the conventional guys are pretty fixed and they're going to do the one thing and we're going to be diverse. Because organic was small and the diversity helped us and it helped the other growers that we were working with. One grower's product benefits another grower in a particular window. So we are I think, largest and certainly the most diverse organic tree fruit marketing company in America. And we continue to look at diversity. We're talking today about bringing more papayas into the States because, the flavor profiles and so on and so forth. So windows, summer citrus, winter product, some southern hemisphere mixes are really what keeps us a stronger company and helps us help all the growers we work for, from Washington State through California down to Mexico and below.
If kohlrabi is what it takes to grow business, we will absolutely try to plant it. I never thought I'd see a whole leaf of kale be actually eaten instead of having chicken salad or tuna salad on it. So it shows you kind of how much I know about where their consumer tastes are going. But I think our goal is to get people to eat healthy and get people to eat more of it. And so whether that's organic kohlrabi or organic leaf lettuce or organic strawberries, we want healthier consumption to be taking place across the nation. So whatever we can do to help facilitate that consumption is what we're going to do our best to do.
So one more question for me, and then I'll open it up for the audience. I'm sure there's some interesting perspectives out here, and happy to field some questions. But in my role at the Trade Association, I work a lot on regulatory issues, spend a lot of time with the National Organic Standards Board, and they are continuously more and more focused on the tools that are currently available to producers. And I'm talking about the pesticide products and fertilizer products. I'd like to just get your perspectives on, what are the tools that you feel like you don't have right now, and where could those come from? And then second, what are the things that you're most concerned about losing? With more and more pressure on kind of cleaning up the national list, so to speak, and getting those things off, what are your biggest concerns about tools being lost there?
Well, I just think when you realize in farming that you have to plan so far out ahead of time. I think the biggest issue is really around just making sure we have clarity. So nobody likes change all the time. So if there's this degree of uncertainty of what the future is going to look like, that's going to make it less likely that the farmers are willing to go through the transition. So I think to the extent you can get it stable, and it's good to have debates and dialogues, but you don't want changes all the time. And so I think that's the biggest thing. And then these new biopesticides and these new tools, trying to find a way to accelerate that they come into the market, because they're going to be critically important. As regular chemicals are getting more heavily regulated, which is totally fine. It's not only in the organic production we need these tools, we actually need them in conventional as well. And we are increasingly using things like organic fertilizer in our conventional product, because we actually think the product is better. And so the more we can get these tools to market is helpful. But people want stability to some extent, and so they don't want the rules to change all the time. That's going to make it really, really tough.
Yeah, no, I started investing in that biopesticide business years ago and realized the barriers to entry in the U.S. were so hard and difficult that I just kind of focused and stayed down in South America, trying to, for lack of better, get our act together, maybe one day raise more money and start trying to register products in the States. But now that I've met this gentleman, we'll see.
Well, and the tree fruit industry experienced it really strongly, particularly with the fire blight and loss of antibiotic controls.
Yeah.
Talking about the stability issue, what I'm hearing is that the pear industry in California in particular is being hit really hard by that loss, because the research wasn't quite there, and that juxtaposition is really challenging.
Yeah, that antibiotic fight's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
I've heard both sides of that, so.
That's why you're down south.
I think from the vegetable side, I'd say probably seed genetics and speed of improvement of seed genetics, and probably on the biofungicide area where we'd like to see a more rapid improvement. To me, it's more about preventing your outright loss on a quality basis in the field, to where you don't have a crop to be able to market and put out there at a comparable quality level to a conventional product. And so is there different implements there that we can utilize that'll help bridge that gap and minimize your losses, is where I think the biggest step forward will come.
Great. Well, I think we're open up the floor. There's a lot of folks here, so I assume there's questions. Yeah, here up front.
This is for Jared. Talking about transition of ground. When we first transitioned our first organic ground, we had the attitude of transitioning marginal ground. Now we're into the idea of, obviously, you have to transition your best ground. Well, in the Salinas Valley, that's $3,000+ an acre ground that I need to get 2 crops off a year. I can get 1 good crop off in the spring without losing production. How is a shipper supposed to help me to recoup that other $1,500 an acre in rent that I'm losing on a second crop that I can't grow?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's an expensive process. The fringe ground and the readily available fringe ground is no longer readily available, and now you're after the good stuff, right? The good stuff is expensive. So a couple things need to happen. I mean, it's got to be a planned, concerted effort, and you need to have a crop plan and portfolio there that'll allow you to get the turns that you need, and you need to have an outlet for it. And that's the biggest challenge, where you're going to have a planned set return against all your input costs.
Do I hear the shipper saying that you won't want to subsidize that second crop at $1,500 an acre, and I just supposed to take the risk?
I think you're probably hearing the shipper say that with the right crop mix and the right plan in place, that you will see people willing to help you take that risk to convert that ground.
I won't put you on the spot.
Don't do that to me, all right?
But on that topic, I mean, what are your initial impressions about a transitional market and trying to develop that?
We're doing it today. It's an expensive process. You need to know where you're going and where you expect to be with your market and your business, and it's a commitment. Once you're in and you start, you're in. You're not coming back from it, and if you do, you're at a pretty tough loss. Having the right product mix, to me, is key. Getting one long-term crop off in the spring is not going to get you there. You need to combine that with some different faster moving crops, your baby green items, to be able to complement, your longer term crops and to help get another turn back for your rent. That's critical, and you need to be able to sell. You have to have an outlet for that product, and it's got to be a conventional outlet, right? And so if you don't have those outlets, then it's a tough process. There's shippers out there that do, and those are the ones that I think are gonna be ahead of the curve in terms of getting the amount of ground they need and where they need it.
I applaud you for trying again this transitional movement. I do.
Yeah.
And you were talking that you have in place the going back. You used a word, I forget.
Arrested transition.
Arrested transition. Yeah. So I don't know how you've mastered that, but I'm interested to hear it. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a great message, and money spent in that message could really help.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I won't belabor this point and get down too far in the weeds, but to answer that question specifically, what we've proposed in our framework is that you get 2 shots in the transitional market. You transition your ground in, something may happen, you may have a disease outbreak, there's recognizing that
You can't keep coming back.
You can't keep coming back. You get two times into the transitional market under this program, and then for a particular piece of ground. And
That's a start.
And then that goes out. But from a marketing perspective, what we've heard is the challenge is that you have a perpetually dwindling supply base, and so that if you're investing,
I have a lot of experience. We can talk about it.
Yeah, if you're
California
investing-
Clean. We
It's
really
a
thought
challenge.
Of
Yep.
the right idea.
So, I think it opened up some more questions. I think in the back there with the hat.
I know you all are primarily focused on farming the soil, but I was wondering if any of you have looked to aquaponics or aeroponics as potential solutions to some of the issues we've talked about?
Yeah, so we don't go all the way to aquaponics. I mean, what we do is we basically grow in substrates, so some combination of peat moss and cocoa fiber. It is very common now in the berry industry, especially in Europe, where there's just not, particularly in Northern Europe, there's just not enough land to be on a long enough rotation, so there we have been farming that way for a long time, and it works extremely well. And when you look at the overall sustainability of the whole system, we would argue that that's actually a lot more sustainable, especially on the water side. Because we use a lot less water. And there's no runoff. That's our other big issue, particularly in Salinas Valley, with all the issues we've had with the runoff and with the nitrates and how that's going to get regulated. And so you go in these systems, these are for berry production, you basically have no runoff at all. And so that's definitely a direction we are going. The other thing is in strawberries, what we're going to be able to do is move the berries to the pickers, move them off the ground. And so today in the UK, about 55% of the strawberry production is actually on tables, where the berries have moved up to the picker, so the picker doesn't have to bend over. And so when you look at it, our number one constraint today in California is labor, and it's because it's hard work. I mean that's just the reality. So one of our big jobs is to make it less hard. Automation helps, but this technology also helps. But you obviously can't grow in the soil, up at 5 feet. So.
Yeah, and from a regulatory perspective, I think this is you're touching on a hot button topic right now in organic, and there's movement, and pretty soon what we're thinking is going to be rapid movement on this. We're going to have a report that is coming out from the National Organic Standards Board Task Force as soon as next week. That's supposedly to inform the board on a recommendation that will be considered this fall around hydroponics, containerized production, and what we expect is potentially some aquaponic parameters. But where that's headed is definitely an issue right now, and it's something that I encourage everyone to get invested in and involved in, because as I keep learning about it and hearing is that is where food production in general is headed. Maybe not entirely, but for some types of crops, that's where it's going to go. And organic needs to make a decision about how to incorporate these new technologies into the regulations. So, yeah, in the back.
Hi, I'm with Imperfect Produce, and Greg, by the way, thank you for saying something about produce. I'm just curious why, if we're looking at stewards of the earth, why we're not considering really taking advantage of this current movement more in terms of consumer education, because the millennial generation is passionate about this. I don't know the last time ag has been on the front cover of Nat Geo, say many generations.
We could turn around.
So they're trying to drive, and I don't hear much discussion
Well, I think you heard pretty clearly from Taylor Farms that the investments go where the money is. Okay, I mean that's just most farmers are in it, because it's a business. This is how they make a living. I mean we can't ignore that reality. Okay, I mean this is not a. I mean there are people that are in it because they really enjoy it, and that's that's the only reason they're in it. But the vast majority of farmers and the vast majority of food is produced by people that are in it because it's a business, and so they will produce whatever consumers are willing to pay for it. I mean, that's just a reality. So there are almond trees in the Central Valley because that's where the money is. It's not more difficult than that. Now it'll be less money in the future. But so I think that's a reality that's difficult to sort of argue against. I think selling, all the fruit. So the whole area of fruit waste is a huge opportunity, and that's something that we are beginning to take a really hard look at. In our industry, the challenge is that because most of the work happens out in the field by the field labor, it's the math that today just doesn't work out for us to take all the misshaped strawberries and have to deal with those out in the field. So they just go on the ground. That's the reality. All the misshaped strawberries, and you may say, well, they're perfectly fine, and we say they're ugly. They just go on the ground because the math is such that if we have to pick it and handle it and send it somewhere and deal with it and put it in a label and so forth, we don't get the money back for that extra handling. So today in the berry business is a math question. It's just that it just makes you less money, and we slow down the pickers even more, and we don't have enough pickers. So we can't do anything in our business today that slows down the pickers. That's just the reality. And so we are looking at, do we completely change our system to where instead of packing all the fruit out in the field, for example, we move those operations to more of a centralized operation, and maybe we could market all the fruit, including all the misshaped berries, and do something more with them that generates value. So there's something we're looking at, but it's not that simple in our business. We definitely have not found the solution.
For what it's worth, I paid my dues. I started a juice company for that reason, and we work for farmers that don't give us exactly what the market wants. They give us what they have, and we do our best with that fruit and find homes for it. And you've been in our office, and we're supporting in every way we can this movement, because we are in a day-to-day marketplace, and we're living with fruit that's not perfect when it arrives. So more homes for that, great. More press for that, more OTA press for that, more money spent in that direction, all good.
Yeah, and I don't think you'll find any company up here or in the room that wouldn't support the initiative that you're talking about and think that it's the right direction to go, particularly and we'll be the first company that would be more than happy to sell product that's got levels of cosmetic defect to it that are not going to be an issue for a consumer. A bug bite, tip burn, any of those things that are cosmetic that could feed into the ugly produce category. I mean, there's not a producer or a processor around that is not going to be in favor of that type of reuse of that material. Further on the processing side, there's an advantage there within our company that we try to pursue, and that's even the items that might have a level of decay on them or a defect that is not going to be marketable in the retailer's or consumer's mind once it gets on shelf against a comparable product, is to be able to reuse that material somewhere else. And so product that we don't take out of the field, we look at how else we can incorporate that within our own business. So is that selling that product to a juicer? Is that taking that product back into a company digester, bringing out the methane that we can derive from that material and using it to power our plants? So those are all things that I think are in progress today that probably don't get marketed or promoted well enough, but that I think that everybody in the business is conscious about.
We do it as a service to the growers. I'm actually making a lot of fermented apple juice for organic apple cider vinegar now. Everything we can to use the crop.
We have time for one more quick question, and then we'll be breaking up here in front.
As more acreage is planned for organic, is there a timeline of when the premium will start reducing the cost of being organic?
The basic supply-demand question.
We've seen
The
premiums
question is, as acreage grows, is there a kind of a tipping point for when the premium that we're seeing in organic produce is going to go away or be lessened?
To me, personally, I see it as a moving chart. So I say this a lot, it's going to be there and then it's going to be there, but it's not going to be a straight line. So it looks like this. But I think it looks like this, and it will continue to look like that. So there'll be dips, there'll be times where, gosh, I wish I didn't do that, but then the next year or the year after, you wish you did. Because we do see a really changing marketplace. And it's really hard to balance the supply side with the demand side right now. I mean, Juicero's going to be talking in a few minutes, and Suja and all these other juice companies that are coming up and need fresh product. There's just a lot of demand from a lot of different sources. As I said earlier, the apple cider vinegar movement, right? So it's a tough one. I mean, we see it ebb and flow. We've seen our price, in a window, our prices are close to conventional. We sell lots of different products. So one day our mangoes can be 50 cents more a box. The next day they could be $5 more a box. And we've seen that for 15 or 18 years. So I think it's a hard one to answer.
I think it's going to occur, at least on our side, it's going to be a little bit commodity specific, and it's going to happen when your input costs start to get closer to your equilibrium with your conventional counterpart, obviously. And a lot of these factors play into that, and all the commodities are not created differently, or not created equal. So you can have an organic spinach issue where we have a huge downy mildew problem across the board. Would a new biofungicide help turn that table around and prevent losses? Absolutely. Would a growing, budding, dried chip, spinach chip, or juice market help to alleviate the loss associated with their current mildew issue? Absolutely. And so as soon as you start to see all of these inputs start to come into equilibrium with your conventional counterparts, slowly you'll start to see that premium slide down. And then there's certain items that's occurred already. I'll point to baby lettuces. I mean, that's a great example. It's also the item that, at least on the vegetable side, there's been the most time with. Seed breeders have had the most time with it. Growers have had the most time with it, and it's done fairly well and been able to keep up with demand.
Yeah, there's no reason why the premium couldn't be there in the long run. The consumer fundamentals are really, really good. Okay, they're very strong. So I think that's what we should be encouraged by. But reality is that today organic is for the most part a subset of the overall category, and so you just have this greater volatility. In farming we're very good at overproducing. We have a long track record of doing that. And so when it's just a subset of the whole, you're going to have these periods where, but fundamentally there's no reason why for farmers and for the shippers this couldn't be a very great business for a long time.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists. A little housekeeping. The keynote sessions are going to be in the ballroom, the Monterey Ballroom, where we had the reception last night. So after folks head out of here, they should head across the street, and that's where the keynotes will be. So thanks, everybody.